and a half ago, I suppose, I heard that I'd got this big grant from the ERC, the European Research Council, for a 5-year project to study the history of yoga, in particular the physical bits of yoga. And I invited the 20 best scholars of yoga in the world, and Sanskritists, so people working on Sanskrit text that, from which we can learn about the history of yoga. And they all said yes. You know, it's absolutely fantastic, really like a dream come true. So these are texts that still are only available in manuscript form. So there's, you know, you can't go out and buy a book about this text, you can't buy a translation, it's just available in manuscript form in libraries in India or around the world. And then we sit down and we try to make sense of them. So literally, you know, puzzling over syllables or words, and you know, sometimes we'll spend 10-15 minutes like trying to work out exactly what's going on with one word, or you know, how it fits into the meter of the verse.
Let's read. So the first verse, very nice. Sri Kantha Kantha Luthita Dhara Pallava Srihi Srinatha Bhakshashi Kritang Risharo Ruhasrihi Sri Vasayoni Mukha Pankaja Lochana Srihi Srihi Sri Prada Bhavatusha Jagato Malasrihi. On the basis of meaning, as well as on the basis of these metric patterns and on the basis of grammar, and if we have different sources, like this manuscript is having one reading, another manuscript is having another reading, we can compare and choose, we can have some guess what is behind, and so on. Pariharya Moham, having removed the delusion, confusion of one's mind. Kritva Bapusthirataram, this is also maybe interesting, made the body firmer, steady. Sthirataram Pratyati Siddhim, a meditator, a yogin achieves, finally attains perfection.
Can I go back to the Vyasadhyaya?
Yeah.
I may have missed something. What was your suggestion?
Samasadhyaya, Vyasadhyaya. So, thinking that it would be too much elaborate.
Yes, I thought that, I agree with that, except that I suspect that it should be Vyasa Bhiya, I think. So something's gone wrong there.
Impossible, yeah. But as I told you that the transmission is really problematic. Out of 400 verses, we have only 243.
So I come now to the question of philosophical underpinning. This is a rather big topic. But I try to, again, just say something very simple and elementary about it. You remember that the Purvapakshan, I had imagined him saying, well, they are all yogacharas or madhyamakas. In any case, they cannot possibly believe in the existence of external objects, including the body. External means external to mind. And far from believing those external objects to be real, they believe that their appearance is a symptom of error and is caused by our mistakes, let us say, or our habitual ignorance.
One of the texts I'm working on, a recent discovery, is that the earliest text to teach the practices of physical yoga was in fact composed by Buddhists. So I had to completely revise my understanding of the history of the whole tradition that I've been working on for 20 years or whatever. You know, hang on, suddenly the root text of it is Buddhist and not Hindu tantric. Hatha yoga is not a religion in itself. In fact, the texts are pretty non-sectarian. But at the same time, it's clear that this text was written within a Buddhist community.
Yeah, hi, I'm Dr. S.V.B.K.V. Gupta. I'm working for this Hatha Yoga project as a researcher to collect various manuscripts in India in different libraries. First, we take the references from the catalogs. Then we go to the libraries without mishandling them. It is very comfortable to scan them with our scanner. So we scan them and we use for the research work.
This will be a rather informal presentation. See, yeah, so this is one. Bauer dates it to the end of the 4th century, second half of second quarter. So what is particularly nice for me is that, since you have a whole leaf, you can see many features of early poetry that you don't see even in some of the oldest palm leaf manuscripts. This is a collection that it's not, cataloged anywhere. This is a collection of from Bengal. It was given by Evans Wentz to Johnston and then here to the Bodleian. And it's kind of, it's made up of these Bengalese manuscripts. But I wanted to show you this. This is simply part of the collection which is not catalogued at all, and so nothing is known about it.
There's some great scholars at this workshop, but the real guru of all of us is Professor Alexis Sanderson, who was my PhD supervisor at Oxford. And he spent 7 years in Kashmir in the 70s living with a traditional tantric Shaiva guru, and he's then spent the rest of his life studying the traditions of tantric Shaivism. So Shaivism is like the worship of Shiva.
So I began looking in this literature to somehow build up an understanding of the historical process which led to the traditions I was studying in Kashmir, which were late, highly sophisticated, very learned traditions which rested on a long prehistory. So I've been trying in the last 40 years to expose that history and to get some sense of how the religion developed and changed over the centuries. But there are other areas of Indian religion which have remained completely obscure, had not been looked at, and yoga is certainly one of them. And Jim Mallinson started getting into this area and did his doctoral thesis on a text which seems in many ways to be continuous with Shaiva yoga tradition. And so the question was, to what extent, how are these two bodies of meditative practice related? How has the Hatha Yoga tradition, say, or the tradition of other yogic groups positioned itself in relation to these dominant cultural forms that the Shaivas developed? And in this way, through this careful analysis, looking at many unpublished texts, he's gradually built up a picture of how this trend in Indian religion became central and influential in many different sectarian groups, and how eventually it became mainstream. And then the rest of the text goes to each of these centers and tells the yogin what he will hear as proof of the fact that he's now penetrated this level. Of course, because the words are non-semantic, because they are onomatopoeic, the manuscripts have trouble with them. Because they're not, as it were, in the dictionary. So there are quite a few variant readings, which is a problem for a yogin who's listening out for the required sound. Did I hear shimmy shimmy or simmy simmy? And are you sure it was dumu duma? So it's like when you put your hands against your ears, you hear some subtle sounds inside, but they're supposed to change as the mantra rises through these levels until it departs from the body. So I take the lead of the venerable feet of Abhinavagupta. Iti natra vivadbir asmabhyam asuyitavyam. I pray that the learned will not be too angry with me. I wanted to end with that because I think it does show that the tradition is undergoing constant transformation. But the sad thing is, I always feel as a student of Shaivism that in the background is something even more weird and interesting, which I can't quite reach through the texts.
So Stroman notes the curious divisions of the Sri Tattvanidhi and the confusions in the texts, such as asanas being referred to anaphorically before they're described and illustrated, which shows that they've moved around. The Hatha Abhyasa Paddhati has 112 postures, while the Sri Tattvanidhi has 122. 6 of the extra postures here, 75 to 80, are simple classical seated postures. So Sukhasana, Singhasana, Bhadrasana, Virasana, Padmasana, and Siddhasana, ending with Siddhasana as number 80. And the poses after 80 are said to be additional. So all those extra poses of the Hatha Abhyasa Paddhati sort of are dumped at the end. And I think this indicates clearly that the compiler had an agenda to make a set of 80 asanas. He believed that there should be, the grouping, there should be 80 asanas and they should end with Siddhasana and these other poses. Which strengthens, I think, the hypothesis that the reordering of the HAP's postures in the Sri Tattvanidhi was a conscious and intentional choice by the redactor, if not a wise choice.
We have, of course, complex asanas, but also quite a physical type of pranayama, where the breath is manipulated, the inhalation, the exhalation, lengthened perhaps, and the breath held. Well, in Hatha Yoga, it's more similar to some of the karanas, in the sense that, but there's different terminology. They're not called karanas, they're called bandhas, and they're integrated with the phases of the breath. So as the yogin breathes in, he, at the end of the inhalation, applies the chin lock and the root lock. He grips the anus and squeezes the chin like this, and then he draws the navel in and up towards the spine, which causes the diaphragm to hyperextend. He does this while holding the breath. Then at the end of the breath retention, he releases the chin lock, but then actually exaggerates the hyperextension of the diaphragm using Uddiyana Bandha, and then holds Uddiyana Bandha while breathing out. And this enables the practitioner to breathe out for a very long period of time.
There are many forms of yoga, and very important in the history of the evolution of yoga is the Shaiva Tantras. You sit in a posture which is conducive to meditative activity, and then you concentrate on God. And there are a lot of breathing exercises, but no complicated stretching exercises. And a lot of ritual, in fact, tantric ritual involves things that you're doing really with your mind. You're not, so you cultivate the divinity in your heart, which is of course not your physical heart, but this imagined heart in your yogic body. And before you project the same divinity that you will worship in an outside substrate.
So there's all sorts of different approaches to these texts, to the history of yoga. For some people it's much more personal in terms of how they're going to apply these things. And for others it's maybe a more intellectual academic pursuit. But those two don't have to be in opposition. And I think for these Sanskrit intellectuals or authors themselves, this is an interesting question of, were they themselves practitioners, those who wrote these texts, or were they simply academics? I'm inclined to think that they were practitioners often themselves, based on the content and the exquisite details of these postures, some of which we saw today. You can see that a lot of this information would have only been written by somebody who had actually tried and sort of tested these things out.
Yoga today is quite contested. You know, what is it? There are so many different traditions.
So there's Iyengar yoga, Ashtanga yoga, Bikram yoga, Shivananda yoga, hot yoga, flow yoga, power yoga, all these kinds of yoga, and then there's Hatha yoga.
Well, it was really interesting to see them using their knowledge of their bodies and what their bodies could do, and have that help us interpret the text. And it was intoxicatingly beautiful to watch, wasn't it? To hear the Sanskrit, to see them practice.
Kurpara paryantau hastau dharam avashtabhya januni nabhau sankunchya tishtet jatakasanam bhavati. Supporting oneself on the ground with the hands as far as the elbows. Kurpara paryantau hastau. Bend the knees at the navel.